The helicopter's rotors cut through the thick Afghan night air as Technical Sergeant Maria Santos checked her equipment one final time. At 26, she had been deployed to forward operating bases across the Middle East more times than she cared to count, but tonight felt different. The weight of her communications gear pressed against her back as she glanced around at the Navy SEALs seated across from her in the cramped aircraft. Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison caught her eye and gave a reassuring nod. The veteran SEAL had specifically requested Maria for this operation, knowing her reputation for keeping communication lines open under the most challenging circumstances. Her job was simple in theory, but complex in execution. Establish and maintain radio contact between the ground team and command while they conducted a high-value target extraction in a remote mountain village. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Intelligence indicated that a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces was hiding in a compound nestled in the mountains near the Pakistan border. The SEALs would infiltrate, capture, or eliminate the target and extract within a 2-hour window. Maria's role was to set up a communications relay point on a nearby ridge and ensure that command could track the team's progress throughout the operation. As the helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, Maria ran through her mental checklist once more. Her pack contained state-of-the-art radio equipment, satellite communication devices, and enough battery power to maintain contact for 12 hours if necessary. She had trained extensively on every piece of gear, practicing setup procedures until she could assemble the equipment blindfolded. Her marksmanship scores were excellent, but tonight she was expected to stay behind the action, providing the vital communication link that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The aircraft touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. Within seconds, the SEAL team was moving, their night vision goggles cutting through the darkness as they established a perimeter around the landing zone. Morrison approached Maria as she shouldered her heavy pack. "Remember, Santos, you set up on that ridge and keep those communication lines open no matter what happens down here," he said, pointing toward a rocky outcropping about 800 meters from the target compound. "If things go sideways, you call for immediate extraction. Your job is to watch our backs from up there, not to engage unless absolutely necessary." Maria nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She had worked with special operations teams before, but never in terrain this challenging or on a mission this critical. The intelligence reports suggested minimal enemy presence in the area, but everyone knew how quickly situations could deteriorate in these mountains. The SEALs began their approach toward the target compound, moving with the fluid precision that came from years of training and combat experience. Maria headed in the opposite direction, climbing steadily toward her designated position. The rocky terrain was treacherous in the darkness, and her heavy communications equipment made every step a calculated effort. Loose stones shifted under her boots as she navigated around boulders and through narrow passages between the rocky outcroppings. After 45 minutes of steady climbing, Maria reached her position. The ridge provided excellent visibility of the target compound below and maintained clear line-of-sight communication with both the SEAL team and the command post back at the forward operating base. She quickly began assembling her equipment, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the cold mountain air that made her fingers stiff inside her tactical gloves. The satellite communication array came together first. Its dish pointed toward the communications satellite that would relay her signals back to headquarters. Next came the tactical radio system that would maintain contact with Morrison's team as they moved through the compound. Finally, she set up the long-range radio that would serve as a backup communication method if the primary systems failed. "Overwatch, this is ground team." Morrison's voice crackled through her headset as she completed the equipment setup. "We're in position and beginning our approach to the target building. How copy?" "Ground team, this is Overwatch. I have you loud and clear, Maria responded, adjusting her position to maintain visual contact with the team below. Through her night vision scope, she could see the SEALs moving like shadows across the compound's outer perimeter. Command post, this is Overwatch. Communications are established and operational. The voice of Colonel Richards, the mission commander, came through clearly from the forward operating base 40 kilometers away. Outstanding, Overwatch. Maintain constant communication and report any changes in the tactical situation. For the next 30 minutes, Maria watched as the SEAL team methodically cleared building after building in the compound. Their movements were precise and professional, each man knowing exactly where his teammates were positioned at all times. She relayed their progress to the command post while monitoring multiple radio frequencies for any sign of enemy activity in the surrounding area. The operation was proceeding exactly according to plan when everything went wrong. Contact! Contact! Morrison's voice exploded through her headset. The controlled calm replaced by urgent intensity. We have multiple enemy fighters in the main building. They were waiting for us. Maria's heart rate spiked as she heard the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire echoing across the valley below. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes erupting from windows throughout the compound as Taliban fighters who had been lying in ambush opened fire on the SEAL team. "Ground team, this is Overwatch," she called into her microphone, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I count at least 12 enemy positions in the main building and 3 more in the secondary structures. You have additional fighters moving in from the north side of the compound." "Copy that, Overwatch," Morrison replied, his breathing heavy as he moved under fire. "We're pinned down in the courtyard. Need immediate support to break contact and extract." Maria immediately switched to the command frequency. "Command post, this is Overwatch. Ground team is in heavy contact with a larger enemy force than anticipated. They need immediate air support or extraction." Colonel Richards' voice came back tense but controlled. "Overwatch, be advised that air support is 20 minutes out. Apache gunships are en route but currently engaged with another situation. Ground team needs to hold position and wait for support." 20 minutes was an eternity in combat. Maria could see that the SEALs were outnumbered and outgunned, taking cover behind whatever protection they could find in the compound's courtyard. Enemy fighters were moving to flank their position, and without immediate support, the team would be overrun. "Ground team, this is Overwatch," she called. "You have enemy fighters attempting to flank your position from the west side, 2 groups of 3 fighters each, moving along the outer wall." Morrison's response was interrupted by the sound of an explosion. "Thanks for the heads up, Overwatch. We're taking heavy fire and running low on ammunition. Can you adjust our extraction plan?" Maria was already working on alternative extraction scenarios when she saw movement that made her blood run cold. A group of enemy fighters was setting up what appeared to be a heavy machine gun position on the roof of a building that would give them a commanding field of fire over the entire courtyard where the SEALs were trapped. "Ground team, you have enemy fighters setting up a crew-served weapon on the roof of Building 3. If they get that gun operational, your position will be untenable." The sound of gunfire intensified, and Maria could hear the strain in Morrison's voice when he responded. "We see it, Overwatch, but we can't get an angle on that position from down here. We're completely pinned down." Maria studied the tactical situation through her scope, her mind racing through possible solutions. The heavy machine gun position was partially concealed behind a low wall on the rooftop, but she could see enough of the enemy fighters to potentially engage them. The range was just over 600 meters, at the extreme limit of effective rifle fire, but it was possible. She had qualified expert on the M4 rifle and had extensive training on the precision-designated marksman rifle she carried as backup equipment. Her shooting scores were consistently in the top 10% of her unit, but she had never fired a shot in actual combat. Her role was communications, not direct engagement with enemy forces. But as she watched the Taliban fighters prepare their machine gun for operation, Maria realized that following standard procedures might mean watching the entire SEAL team die in that courtyard below. "Command post, this is Overwatch," she called, her finger hovering over the radio transmit button. "I have a possible shot on the crew-served weapon position that's about to overwatch the ground team's position. Requesting permission to engage." There was a long pause before Colonel Richards responded. "Overwatch, your primary mission is communications. Do not compromise your position by engaging enemy forces." Maria understood the reasoning behind the order, but she also understood that in another 60 seconds, the machine gun below would begin firing on Morrison's team. Once that happened, no amount of communication capability would save their lives. She watched through her scope as one of the Taliban fighters lifted a belt of ammunition toward the heavy weapon. In that moment, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos made the decision that would define not only this mission, but the rest of her military career. Setting down her radio microphone, she reached for her precision rifle and began calculating the range and wind conditions for what would be the most important shots of her life. The weight of the weapon felt different in her hands than it ever had during training. This time, American lives hung in the balance, and there would be no do-overs if she missed. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice, now edged with desperation. "Overwatch, they're almost ready to fire that machine gun. If you have any solutions, we need them now." Maria settled into a stable shooting position, her breathing controlled and deliberate as she aligned her crosshairs with the first target. The enemy fighter was partially concealed behind the rooftop wall, presenting only his upper torso as a target. At this range, in these light conditions, it would be a challenging shot even under ideal circumstances. But circumstances were far from ideal, and the lives of 6 Navy SEALs depended on her making shots that she had only practiced on training ranges. As she took up the slack in her trigger, Maria Santos was about to discover whether months of training and natural shooting ability would be enough when everything was on the line. The first shot broke clean and true, the rifle's report echoing across the valley as Maria immediately shifted to acquire her second target. There was no time to confirm the hit or assess the results. The second Taliban fighter was turning toward his fallen comrade, and Maria knew she had perhaps 2 seconds before he would either take cover or return fire in her direction. Her second shot followed the first by less than 3 seconds, and this time she saw the target fall backward behind the rooftop wall. The remaining Taliban fighters around the machine gun position began scrambling for cover, their planned overwatch position suddenly compromised by accurate fire from an unexpected direction. "Outstanding shooting, Overwatch!" Morrison's voice came through her headset, relief evident despite the ongoing firefight. "That machine gun is out of action. You just saved our lives down here." But Maria knew the engagement was far from over. She had revealed her position by firing, and now enemy fighters throughout the compound would be searching for her location. As she prepared to shift to a different firing position, she could see muzzle flashes beginning to wink in her direction as Taliban fighters tried to locate and suppress the sniper who had eliminated their heavy weapons team. The communications specialist, who had been trained to stay behind the action and coordinate from a safe distance, had just become a direct participant in the firefight. There was no going back now. Bullets began snapping past Maria's position as enemy fighters attempted to locate her firing point. The distinctive crack of rounds passing overhead told her that while they hadn't pinpointed her exact location yet, they were getting close. She grabbed her communications equipment and scrambled 20 meters to a different position among the rocks, her heart pounding as she tried to maintain radio contact while under fire. "Ground team, this is Overwatch," she called into her microphone as she settled into a new firing position. "I'm taking fire and repositioning. What's your status down there?" Morrison's voice came back immediately. "We're still pinned down, but that machine gun is definitely out of action. We can see you stirred up a hornet's nest up there." Can you maintain your position? Maria peered through her scope at the compound below. The SEAL team was still trapped in the courtyard, but without the heavy machine gun threatening them, they had been able to establish better defensive positions. However, the enemy fighters were now actively hunting for her position, and she could see several groups moving up the hillside in her direction. I can hold for now, but I've got enemy fighters moving up the hill toward my position, she reported. How long until air support arrives? Still 15 minutes out, came Colonel Richards's voice from the command post. Overwatch, you need to break contact and move to the alternate extraction point. Your primary mission is communications, not direct engagement. But even as the order came through her headset, Maria could see that the situation below was deteriorating rapidly. 2 of the SEALs appeared to be wounded, and the remaining team members were running critically low on ammunition. The enemy fighters in the compound had regrouped after the loss of their machine gun and were preparing for a coordinated assault on the courtyard position. Command post, this is ground team, Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. We have 2 wounded and are almost black on ammunition. We cannot hold this position for another 15 minutes without support. Maria studied the tactical situation through her scope. The enemy fighters were moving with increasing confidence, believing that they had the SEAL team trapped and outnumbered. She could see at least 20 Taliban fighters positioning themselves for what would likely be a final assault on the courtyard. Once they attacked in coordinated groups from multiple directions, Morrison's team would be overwhelmed. But from her elevated position, Maria had clear lines of sight to several key enemy positions. The Taliban fighters were focused on the SEALs below and had not yet identified exactly where the sniper fire had originated. If she could eliminate the enemy leaders and disrupt their attack coordination, it might buy enough time for air support to arrive. Ground team, I can see enemy fighters massing for an assault on your position, she radioed. They're grouping in 3 locations around the compound. I'm going to try to disrupt their attack. Negative, Overwatch, Colonel Richards' voice cut in sharply. You are ordered to maintain communications and prepare for extraction. Do not engage in direct combat. Maria understood the order, but she also understood that following it would likely result in the death or capture of 6 Navy SEALs. The communications equipment that she had been sent to protect would mean nothing if there was no one left alive to communicate with. Command post, this is Overwatch, she replied. I understand your order, but I have the only position that can provide effective fire support for the ground team, respectfully requesting permission to engage. There was a long pause before Colonel Richards responded. Overwatch, your orders are clear. Maintain communications and prepare for extraction. Maria looked through her scope at the SEALs below, then at the enemy fighters who were clearly preparing for a final assault. In that moment, she made a decision that would either save lives or end her military career. Ground team, this is Overwatch. I'm going to provide what support I can. Mark your positions and stay low. She switched off the command frequency and focused entirely on the tactical radio that connected her directly to Morrison's team. Whatever consequences came from disobeying orders would have to be dealt with later. Right now, 6 Americans were about to be overrun by enemy forces, and she was the only one in position to help them. Through her scope, Maria identified the first target, a Taliban fighter who appeared to be directing the movements of other enemy fighters around the compound. He was positioned behind a low wall about 400 meters away, partially concealed, but visible enough for a precision shot. She settled into her firing position, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean, and she immediately shifted to acquire her next target. A group of enemy fighters was positioning themselves to assault the courtyard from the north side, and she could see their leader gesturing and preparing to give the signal for the attack. Her second shot caught him as he raised his arm to signal the advance. The effect on enemy morale was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated attack that had been building momentum suddenly stalled as the Taliban fighters realized that they were taking accurate sniper fire from an unknown position. Instead of pressing their assault on the trapped SEALs, they began seeking cover and trying to locate the source of the deadly accurate shooting. "Outstanding work, Overwatch," Morrison called over the radio. "You just broke up their attack. We can see them scrambling for cover all around the compound." But Maria knew that her advantage was temporary. The enemy fighters would soon locate her position through muzzle flash and sound, and then she would become the primary target. She had perhaps 2 or 3 more shots before she would have to move again, and enemy fighters were already climbing the hillside toward her location. She identified her next target, another enemy leader who was trying to rally his fighters for a renewed assault. This shot was more challenging, as the target was partially concealed behind a concrete barrier and only occasionally exposed when he moved to communicate with his subordinates. Maria waited patiently for the right moment, her crosshairs steady on the edge of cover where the target would appear. When the Taliban fighter stepped out to signal his men, Maria was ready. The shot caught him center mass, and he collapsed behind the barrier. The effect on the remaining enemy fighters was profound. Without their leaders to coordinate the assault, the attack completely disintegrated into individual fighters seeking whatever cover they could find. "Ground team, this is Overwatch. The immediate assault threat has been neutralized, but I'm about to have company up here. How much longer can you hold your position?" Morrison's voice came back strained but determined. "We can hold as long as you can keep them off balance down here, but you need to know that we can see enemy fighters climbing up toward your position. You've got maybe 5 minutes before they reach you." Maria began packing her essential communications equipment while maintaining her firing position. She could hear voices calling in Pashto from somewhere below her position on the hillside. The enemy fighters were definitely closing in on her location, and soon she would either have to abandon her Overwatch position or prepare to fight them at close range. "Command post, this is Overwatch," she called on the emergency frequency. "I need immediate extraction. My position is about to be overrun." Colonel Richards's voice came back immediately. "Overwatch, the extraction helicopter cannot reach your position while you're in contact with enemy forces. You need to break contact and move to the alternate landing zone." The alternate landing zone was over a kilometer away across rough mountain terrain, and Maria knew that she would never reach it while carrying her communications equipment and being pursued by enemy fighters. But she also knew that if she abandoned her equipment, the SEAL team below would lose their only reliable communication link with command and air support. Through her scope, she could see that the Taliban fighters in the compound were beginning to regroup despite the loss of their leaders. New fighters were taking charge, and it would only be a matter of minutes before they resumed their assault on Morrison's team. The arrival of air support was still 10 minutes away, and the SEALs would never survive another coordinated attack without continued sniper support. Maria made a rapid assessment of her tactical situation. Enemy fighters were approaching her position from below, but they were moving cautiously, uncertain of exactly where she was positioned among the rocks. If she could eliminate the lead elements of the pursuit, it might discourage the others and buy additional time for air support to arrive. She gathered her communications equipment and moved to a position that would allow her to observe both the compound below and the approach route that the enemy fighters were using to reach her position. From this new location, she could continue providing overwatch for the SEALs while also defending herself against the approaching threat. The first Taliban fighter appeared among the rocks about 200 meters below her position. He was moving carefully, his rifle at the ready as he searched for any sign of the sniper who had been causing so much damage to his comrades in the compound. Maria settled her crosshairs on center mass and fired. The shot echoed across the mountainside, and she immediately shifted position to avoid return fire. But instead of advancing, the remaining enemy fighters took cover among the rocks. They had lost another man to the hidden sniper, and their enthusiasm for pressing the attack was clearly diminishing. "Ground team, this is Overwatch. I've slowed down the fighters moving toward my position, but they're still out there. What's your ammunition status? Morrison's reply was not encouraging. We're down to our last magazines, Overwatch. We've got wounded who need immediate medical attention. How much longer until air support arrives? Maria checked her watch and calculated the time since the last update from command. Should be about 8 minutes out. Can you hold that long? We'll have to. Just keep doing what you're doing up there. You're the only thing standing between us and being overrun. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Maria's shoulders. She was a communications specialist who had been trained to coordinate and support, not to single-handedly hold off enemy attacks. But circumstances had thrust her into a role that she had never trained for, and the lives of 6 Navy SEALs depended on her ability to adapt and overcome. She could hear movement among the rocks below her position, indicating that the enemy fighters were still attempting to reach her location despite taking casualties. Soon she would be fighting for her own survival while still trying to provide overwatch for the SEALs trapped in the compound below. The situation was rapidly approaching a critical point where something would have to give. Through her scope, she could see new movement in the compound as fresh enemy fighters arrived to reinforce their comrades. The Taliban had clearly decided that eliminating the SEAL team was worth significant casualties, and they were preparing for another assault regardless of the sniper threat from the hillside. Maria checked her ammunition count and realized that she was facing the same problem as the SEALs below. She had brought enough rounds for her planned communications mission, but not for an extended firefight against multiple enemy forces. Every shot would have to count, and she would have to make crucial decisions about when to engage and when to conserve ammunition. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission that would change everything about the tactical situation. But as she reached for her microphone to respond, movement among the rocks below caught her attention. The enemy fighters pursuing her had divided into 2 groups and were attempting to flank her position from both sides. In less than 60 seconds, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos would discover whether her training and instincts were sufficient to keep her alive while protecting 6 Navy SEALs who were counting on her to get them home. The radio transmission that crackled through Maria's headset carried the most welcome words she had ever heard. All stations, this is Thunder 1-7. We have eyes on the compound and are beginning our gun runs. Danger close, danger close. Apache gunships had finally arrived. Thunder 1-7, this is ground team. Morrison's voice came through immediately. We are in the central courtyard taking heavy fire from multiple positions around the compound. We also have friendly sniper support on the ridgeline to the east who is currently engaged with enemy fighters. Maria grabbed her radio as she saw Taliban fighters moving closer to her position from both flanks. Thunder 1-7, this is Overwatch on the eastern ridge. I have enemy fighters attempting to assault my position from 2 directions. I need immediate support to maintain Overwatch capability for ground team. The lead Apache pilot's voice was calm and professional. Overwatch, we have thermal signatures showing multiple hostiles moving up the hillside toward your position. We're going to work the compound first to relieve pressure on ground team, then we'll clear your area. Can you mark your exact position? Maria pulled out an infrared strobe that would be visible to the gunship's thermal imaging systems. Marking my position now with IR strobe. Enemy fighters are approximately 100 to 200 meters below my position, moving up from the southwest and northwest. Copy that, Overwatch. We see your strobe. Take cover and stay low. The sound of the Apache's 30mm chain gun was unmistakable as it began engaging targets around the compound. Through her scope, Maria could see Taliban fighters scrambling for cover as explosive rounds tore through their positions. The coordinated assault on the SEAL team's position disintegrated instantly as enemy fighters focused on survival rather than attack. But the Taliban fighters moving up the hillside toward Maria's position were not deterred by the air support below. They were too close to her location for the Apache to engage without risking friendly fire, and they seemed determined to eliminate the sniper who had caused so much damage to their comrades. Maria could hear voices calling in Pashto from positions very close to her own. The enemy fighters had split into two groups and were attempting to surround her position among the rocks. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they would be close enough for hand-to-hand combat. "Ground team, this is Overwatch," she called into her radio. "I'm about to be engaged at close range. Maintain communication with Thunderflight and direct their fires on the compound." "Understood, Overwatch," Morrison replied. "We've got it handled down here thanks to you. Now you focus on staying alive up there." Maria shouldered her precision rifle and drew her sidearm. In the close quarters fighting that was about to commence, the pistol would be more maneuverable than the longer rifle. She had qualified expert on the M9 pistol, but like her rifle shooting, all of her experience had been on controlled ranges rather than in actual combat. The first Taliban fighter appeared between the rocks about 20 meters to her left, his AK-47 rifle sweeping back and forth as he searched for her position. Maria settled her pistol sights on center mass and squeezed the trigger twice. The double tap caught the fighter in the chest, and he collapsed behind a boulder. The sound of her shots immediately drew attention from the second group of fighters approaching from her right. She could hear rapid movement among the rocks as they attempted to close the distance to her position before she could engage them with aimed fire. Maria moved quickly to a different position among the rocky outcroppings, trying to avoid being pinned down in one location where the enemy fighters could surround her. Her communications equipment was scattered among several positions, and she tried to stay close enough to maintain contact while still having room to maneuver. Two more Taliban fighters appeared simultaneously, one from each direction. Maria engaged the closer threat first, her pistol bucking in her hands as she fired 3 quick shots at a fighter who was less than 15 meters away. She saw him fall, but didn't have time to confirm the kill before pivoting toward the second threat. The second fighter had already spotted her and was bringing his rifle to bear when Maria's shots caught him high in the chest. He stumbled backward but didn't fall, and Maria could see that he was still trying to aim his weapon in her direction. She fired again, this time with more deliberate aim, and the fighter collapsed among the rocks. "Overwatch, this is Thunder 17, the Apache pilot's voice came through her headset. "We're seeing weapons fire on your position. Are you still mobile?" "Thunder 17, this is Overwatch," Maria replied, breathing heavily as she scanned for additional threats. "I've engaged multiple enemy fighters at close range. I think I've eliminated the immediate threats, but there may be more moving up the hillside." "Copy that, Overwatch. We're going to make a pass along the hillside below your position to clear any remaining hostiles. Stay low and keep that IR strobe active." The Apache made a devastating gun run along the slope below Maria's position, the 30mm cannon tearing through rocks and vegetation as it eliminated any remaining Taliban fighters who might have been climbing toward her location. The message was clear. The hillside belonged to the Americans now. "Ground team, this is Overwatch," Maria called as she gathered her scattered communications equipment. "I'm consolidating my position and reestablishing full communications capability. What's your status?" Morrison's voice came back with obvious relief. "Overwatch, we've got the compound secured thanks to Thunderflight. Our 2 wounded are stable and we're preparing for extraction. You probably just saved all our lives up there." "Thunder 17, this is ground team," Morrison continued. "We're ready for extraction at the primary landing zone. Can you provide Overwatch while the bird comes in?" "Affirmative, ground team. We'll maintain Overwatch until your wheel's up." Maria could hear the distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching as the extraction bird made its way toward the landing zone. The night that had started as a routine communications mission had become one of the most intense combat experiences imaginable, and somehow she had survived. "Overwatch, this is ground team," Morrison called. "The extraction bird is inbound for you as well. Can you make it to the alternate landing zone?" Maria looked at her communications equipment and realized that she had managed to keep most of it functional despite the firefight. The primary radio was damaged but still operational, and the satellite communication system was intact. She began packing everything for transport to the extraction point. "Ground team, this is Overwatch. I'm mobile and moving toward the alternate landing zone. All essential communications equipment is functional." The movement to the landing zone took her 20 minutes across rocky terrain in darkness, but without enemy pursuit, it was manageable. As she reached the designated area, she could see the lights of the extraction helicopter approaching across the valley. When the aircraft touched down, Chief Petty Officer Morrison was waiting at the landing zone to help her aboard. As she climbed into the helicopter with her equipment, he had to shout over the noise of the rotors. "Santos, I don't know what your normal job description says, but you just earned the respect of every SEAL in this unit. That was some of the finest shooting and tactical thinking I've ever seen." As the helicopter lifted off and began the flight back to the forward operating base, Maria finally had a moment to process what had happened. She had violated direct orders, engaged in combat outside her assigned role, and made decisions that could have resulted in court-martial. But she had also saved the lives of 6 Navy SEALs and successfully completed a mission that had gone far beyond anyone's expectations. The radio crackled with Colonel Richard's voice as they flew through the darkness. "Overwatch, this is Command Post. Outstanding work tonight. We'll debrief when you return, but I want you to know that your actions saved American lives." Maria keyed her microphone one final time. "Command Post, this is Overwatch. Mission complete. All personnel and equipment returning to base." As the helicopter flew through the Afghan night, Maria reflected on how quickly circumstances could change and how training and instinct had carried her through situations she had never imagined facing. She had been sent to provide communication support, but had ended up becoming a one-woman fire support team when the mission went sideways. The debriefing would reveal that her shooting had eliminated 8 enemy fighters, including several key leaders whose deaths had prevented a coordinated assault that would likely have overrun the SEAL team. Her decision to disobey orders and engage in direct combat had saved 6 American lives and ensured the success of a critical mission. 3 weeks later, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos stood at attention in front of her entire unit as Colonel Richards read the citation for her Silver Star Medal. The award recognized her exceptional heroism under fire and her decisive actions that had saved the lives of her fellow service members. But more importantly than any medal, Maria had earned something that could never be taken away. The knowledge that when everything was on the line and American lives hung in the balance, she had made the right decisions and executed them flawlessly under extreme pressure. The SEAL team had recommended her for immediate transfer to Special Operations Forces, recognizing abilities that went far beyond her original military specialty. Chief Petty Officer Morrison personally endorsed her application for advanced tactical training, noting in his recommendation that he would trust her to watch his back in any combat situation. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos graduated from the Army's Special Operations Combat Medic course, adding advanced medical training to her already formidable communications and marksmanship skills. Her new assignment would take her to locations where such diverse abilities would be essential for mission success. The helicopter mission that was supposed to be routine communications support had revealed capabilities that Maria herself had not known she possessed. Under pressure and facing impossible circumstances, she had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to function effectively despite fear. The citation for her Silver Star concluded with words that captured the essence of her actions that night. Technical Sergeant Santos's extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. But for Maria, the most meaningful recognition came from Morrison himself, who approached her after the medal ceremony with a simple statement that meant more than any formal award. "Santos, I'd be honored to serve with you again anytime, anywhere. You're the kind of soldier that makes everyone around you better." The young communications specialist, who had climbed a mountain ridge in Afghanistan carrying radio equipment, had descended as a combat veteran who had proven herself under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. She had learned that sometimes the most important equipment a soldier carries is not technical gear, but the courage to do what is right when everything is on the line. Years later, when asked about that night in the Afghan mountains, Maria would always emphasize that she had simply done what any soldier would do for their comrades. But those who were there knew better. They had witnessed something special, a soldier who rose to meet impossible circumstances and found a way to succeed when failure would have cost lives. The mission report concluded that Technical Sergeant Santos had demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment, outstanding marksmanship skills, and unwavering courage under fire. Her actions had not only saved American lives, but had also prevented enemy forces from achieving their objectives against a smaller, outnumbered friendly force. Most importantly, she had proven that when American service members are in danger, their fellow soldiers will find a way to bring them home safely, regardless of the personal risks or professional consequences involved. In the mountains of Afghanistan, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos had embodied the warrior spirit that defines the finest traditions of military service.